Another day, another video game beaten. The simplicity of these games nowadays is getting rather ridiculous. What is it about these games today that took away what used to be a challenge? Is it because the new challenge is in the online play? Or was something added to these games to make them easier? Then again, maybe nothing was added to make these games easier, but instead something was taken away. The main question is, what did the developers change about today's games to make them so easy? Surely I can't be the only person that sees this. I wonder how many of my viewers share the same opinion as I do about today's games. Only one way to find out. Remember when video games actually made you try? Did you ever wonder what happened to that challenge they used to offer? You ever find it strange that the one generation that has the easiest games ironically is the one generation where a lot of people brag about being a hardcore gamer? What brought about this change in the difficulty in games? Is it because developers think the main challenge in their games will come from online competition, so they figure there's no point in making the single player portion of their game a challenge? That makes sense for shooters, but what about the other genres? Was it because a lot of us were younger and the games just seemed more difficult, which I honestly don't believe, since we were more open-minded to games and didn't nitpick every little thing, but instead shut the hell up and played the damn game? Shut the hell up and played the damn game. You know, a lot of our problems this generation could easily be fixed if most people actually did that. Oh well. Remember how beating a game felt like a real accomplishment, but now when you beat a game you almost feel kinda cheated? When games first arrived, they were based more on skill. There wasn't really much to them as they had very few game mechanics, and each time you advanced to the next level, you were still playing the same base level, but something was simply added to it. Like more enemies, or the same enemies but upgraded. Or the game would keep the enemies but change their movement patterns. All in all, the game didn't really change that much. But these games had a main goal, and that was to test your skill. Hell, in most cases, these games didn't even really have an end to them. They just kept going. And the main purpose wasn't really to actually beat the game, but to get the highest score possible. Highest score possible. You know, I wonder if that's how the kill-death ratio works in Call of Duty. Think about it. No matter how much someone was to play that game, they really wouldn't be able to get anywhere. I'm of course talking about the online play, which is the main reason why people get this game. Yeah, you get to the max level, then you prestige, and it starts all over again, and then you end up doing the exact same thing. Maybe the kill-death ratio was a way to give Call of Duty a score system, so to say. I know a lot of people believe kill-death ratio doesn't really matter, and I could be wrong, but I always saw it as a way of keeping score. I guess what I'm trying to say is, kill-death ratio is the Call of Duty, as high scorers were to the arcades. Some people like to have their name as one of the top players. So while I don't really care for Call of Duty, I think I can understand why so many people care so much about their kill-death ratio. What else is there to care about in that game? Oh well, back to the main topic. There are a few things that I believe make gaming much easier now. Some things that were taken away and some that were added. And one of those things are lives. Or maybe better said as attempts. So why do I believe that the lack of lives in games take away the challenge? Well, to me, lives actually made you try harder because you knew that you were limited to how many times you could screw up in a game. If you know that no matter how many times you screw up, you will always get to start from where you left off, then you tend to care less about how hard you try. But if you know that you're on your last life and the next screw up means starting all the way back over, well, you tend not to mess around. The life system could explain why games seem to have taken longer to beat back in the day. Think about a game you bought this generation and beat on the same day you bought it. That didn't really seem to happen in the past, mainly because chances were you weren't going to go through a new game in one day. And since you died quite a bit, in a lot of cases every time you started the game back up, you were once again starting from the beginning. Now don't get me wrong people, I know that nowadays we can't really do that, as even people who claim to be hardcore gamers would break down and cry if they had to start all over again. But I just believe that lives gave us more of a reason not to mess up when we played. When you were on your last life, you were tens. A person who's on their final attempt is going to play way more cautiously than someone who can try as much as they want. And that caution in a way made the game more enjoyable. You weren't thinking, who cares what happens, you were thinking, okay, this is it, I can't screw this up. You tried harder not to screw up, which in a lot of cases made you screw up even more, which would then piss you off and in turn causing you to play worse, which just kind of pissed you off even more. Well, I never said it was always a good experience. Now obviously with some genres you had to let that slide. I mean, lives in an RPG would have probably ended up raising the suicide rate. However, I have played a game that had lives in it this generation, but I believe it was done incorrectly. I remember when I got New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I didn't realize it at first, but I was enjoying the game more for the nostalgia factor than I was for the challenge. Those of you who've played this know that this game is extremely generous with the extra lives. For me to have 99 lives by the time I reached World 7 made me believe Nintendo was being way too generous in this game. I don't know. Maybe I just made the wrong assumption about this game and thought it would be as challenging as Super Mario Bros. 3 was on the NES. That'll teach me to make incorrect assumptions. Add to that the fact that you can save, and that just makes the game even easier. However, as far as saving goes, I guess that's understandable, especially since not everyone has the time to play through a full game in one go. But I think there should be a bigger penalty for failure, and starting where you last saved an infinite number of times just isn't enough. You old school gamers imagine if games were like that before. It makes sense why for a lot of us it took longer to beat older games than it does this gen's games. We were penalized for screwing up too much. So if we were going to get anywhere in the game, we had to actually try. Another thing that I think made gaming easier was the removal of what I like to call the thinking on your own concept. That is, playing without having someone constantly tell you where to go and what to do. A lot of first-person shooters I've played always seem to tell you where to go, be it by them telling you or by marking the spot on the map, or even both. When I think of a game making you think for yourself, the first game that comes to mind is The Legend of Zelda for the NES. This game just put you out there in the middle of nowhere and it was up to you to figure everything out. And to me, that alone was half the fun. But can you imagine a game like this coming out now where you aren't told anything and have to figure out 97% of the game by yourself? People would go crazy. I could just hear IGN now.
Well, the game, well, this game sucks.
But things like that made gameplay last longer because people actually had to use, get ready for it,
their brain.
So now what used to be a concept of, you have to use your brain to beat this game, is now a new concept of, you have to be a damn idiot not to beat this game. The question is, what brought on this change? Are we just better gamers now than we were back then? Or are the developers of today trying to provide a more user-friendly experience with games in order to bring in more people and make them gamers? Is it because while a lot of us would rather be brought into a large world to explore, others just don't have the kind of time that more difficult games request, which in turn makes the last thing developers want to do is give gamers a more difficult experience? That would kinda make sense, I guess. But at the same time, I can't help but feel as if we're missing out on the real challenge that games today aren't providing us as often as they used to. Retro games like Ninja Gaiden and Mega Man relied on a very simple gameplay mechanic, however used clever game design to put the player's skill to the test. So anybody could play these games, but the real test was in beating the game's challenges. So it wasn't so much the mechanics of the game you had to figure out, but how you moved through the world in the game that you had to look out for. I was gonna say casual gamers were the reason for this, but that was too easy. But now I'm brought back to that answer. Is it possible that those of us that have been gaming for a long time are at a higher skill level, so newer games tend to present less of a challenge? If developers are making games easier so not to scare the casual gamers away from a game by its difficulty, then that would make sense. Maybe that's why we have trophies and achievements. Are these supposed to be the developer's way of raising the difficulty in a game? By making the actual game easy, but all the little things within the game hard to achieve? Now don't get me wrong guys, I'm not trying to say all of this should be brought back in hell. In a way it kinda can't be. And for all I know, this could have been my nostalgia talking. But I just feel that as time goes on, games are continuing to become easier. And I'm also not referring to all games, but quite a few of them seem to be this way. And as I've said, I think one of the main things that make games so easy now is we're no longer penalized for failure. Our failures are simply erased and we're put right back where we started before we failed, which ends up reversing the effect and rewarding failure by allowing someone to continue trying until they finally get it right. Are games trying too hard to tell a story more than they are give good gameplay? Take games like Uncharted or Gears of War. If these games had no story to them, would they still be fun? I guess this all depends on if you bought it for the single player experience or multiplayer. But when's the last time you guys beat a game that actually felt like it was an accomplishment as opposed to beating a game and thinking, damn, that's it? Do any of you share the same idea? If so, what are some things you guys think game developers did to take away the challenge in a lot of games today? Because be it due to nostalgia or whatever, games just don't really feel challenging anymore.